So July 2024. We are now getting into third quarter. We've gotten halfway through 2024. Um, and there are some very healing elements that occurred this month. One of the things that I wrote down, I was like, most of the months have some type of healing element to them. Like there is a space where you can, harness certain energies, certain alignments, like really pay attention to them and let that guide you, support you wherever it is that you're trying to go. But what I realized about July is that there um is really a space of like that introspection, and we have a couple things that are in retrograde that are super important. And so with that helps you to just kind of do this review, right? And really pay attention to what is happening. I really think and feel and understand that if we are paying attention to things on like the individual level, then we'll have like there's synergy when we all come together in community. And it's just been a hard lesson. It's not a hard lesson to understand. It's just been difficult to teach and have people grasp onto. Because people, for the most part, in this day and age, are me, me, me. I. You can look at the person that's sitting next to you, know that they're suffering, and still be like, well, I need to champion for myself. Well, there is definitely a space for needing to be unapologetic for looking out for self. We have got to start to develop just a mutual respect for our fellow man, just in general. But I think part of the problem is too, a lot of our subsets, like just there's infighting among different different ethnicities have their own infighting, and then you have gender wars. It's just, there's something all the time, and people just aren't coming together collectively. So starting out July, we have Neptune retrograde in Pisces. Now, I've already done the podcast episode on Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, so make sure you go to Coconut Oil, Stardust, and Dope Vibes and tune into that episode, because I give you just a really in-depth analysis of that. And if you've been following me for a while, I've been talking about the Neptune generations and how important it is, because we've been in Neptune and Pisces since like 2011, 2012. And we are going to be moving into Neptune in Aries like next year, and how important that shift is. So on the 2nd, Neptune goes retrograde in Pisces. We need to really take an in-depth review on our aversion to religion as we approach this age of Aquarius. So what are we talking about here? Well, there was a post that I did on one of my blog sites. I think it was when I was using the platform medium.com. And I was talking about how spirituality will no longer be trendy. Probably like the past 5 years, spirituality was trendy, not because people were really getting into a lifestyle, like a sustaining lifestyle. spirituality became trendy because of the rise in visual aesthetics for things like, branding, things like that. Like you create a visual aesthetic and then that makes you money. So the rise of the visual aesthetic, also just an aversion to um, the overstructure of religion, and how religion has just come in and just become an imbalanced power, that lost its agenda for the people. And this is across the board for, people were seeing this in mainly Christianity, but I've seen some folks kind of, navigate towards some other things too from other religions. But this was when I say religion, I'm mainly talking about looking at people with having aversion with Christianity. And a lot of this, I think, I'm just gonna also break it down even more. This is the Americans as well, with the aversion to Christianity, because we have to also understand that uh there was a lot of appropriation ever since the biblical days. Like when you actually go back and read like Romans and stuff like that, like this was people conquering in the name of Christianity and going to places that were working very well. People were fine. And then saying, we're going to spread the gospel. No, what you were doing was waging war and saying, if you don't accept Christ, there's something wrong with you. And that has trickled down. And we're in a day and age where people understand, like, no, you're not exactly going to hell for it. And, in places like America, the Bible was weaponized. And so there were slave Bibles given out and Bibles rewritten in order to keep people in bondage. And so there have been major wars waged because of religion, outside of Christianity, but just across the board in lots of different countries. So there has been this aversion to organized, structured religion. And so people came over and said, well, I'm going to lead a spiritual lifestyle. And what that kind of did, well, not kind of, but what it did was, for some folks, it took God out of it and replaced it with just just whatever. There was no real replacement. And so it made it difficult, even like for folks like me, where like God is always at the head of everything that I'm talking about. And if you listen to me and you hear the conversations and you see things, like even on my astrology post for the month, there's always a prayer and an affirmation, right? And so people weren't okay with that. They're just like, oh, if you're the spiritual being, like you can't talk about God and astrology. And here came all these other rules, right? Like with this whole dismantling came this other set of rules that people wanted to have exist in order for them to feel okay with the change that they made. And this has been just an interesting time, because with that dismantling came, people were just free floating, and create, like taking concepts like karma and time and love and just remorphing them into something that didn't have any basis, didn't have any structure, and just saying, well, I want it to look like this in order for me to absorb it because I want it like that and I can. Well, I mean, yeah, you can, but why are we reworking something that is centuries old that actually works if you actually understand the way that it works and you actually studied it and you know how it was originally intended? Why do you feel like that needs to be revamped? What that doesn't need to be revamped. What needs to be revamped is the current mind, which has strayed from some of the things that are quality teachings, right? And so this Neptune retrograde in Pisces is, it's gonna have us review kind of like your why. Like, you have people who are denouncing sororities, especially, this is mainly Black sororities and fraternities. They're denouncing it and saying, oh, this has nothing to do with God. You have people just inserting God and religion and all these things. I saw what I think is one of the most interesting things. You know, yoga is supposedly demonic. Meditation is supposedly demonic, according to the Christian church, unless you slap a Christian label on it and call it, what did they call it? It wasn't Christian meditation. They called it Christian something else. And the word escapes me right this moment. But then when I looked it up, I was like, this is meditation. Like, why do you need to reappropriate the word? Why do you need to like morph the word in order for you to just be like, this is meditation? So somehow what you did is a cleanse over it, or just putting the Christian label on it makes you not go to hell for meditating. This is insane. This is insane. If it's that demonic, why are you doing it? Because it's not demonic. It's just that you, in an organized religion, are much like the government. If you don't have your hand in it so you can make the money for it and have the power for it, you don't want the people to have it. You don't want the people to have anything that is actually healing. You don't want, to be outside of that. Like, you can actually be Christian and be the Christian church and say, it's okay to meditate, because you're in a meditative trance when you're speaking in tongues anyway. But then there are other churches, different churches that don't agree with speaking in tongues. So you have all of this division that's happening, because people are just like, I want to do what I want. I want to do this. I want to do that. And nobody's looking at what the end result needs to be. Where the end result needs to be that we need to leave this earth better for the people coming after us. We need to leave them something to work with. And right now, none of the doctrine leaves them anything to work with. Like nothing. We're not leaving them anything substantial to work with. This is just a period of pure chaos. Pure chaos. We're not leaving them anything to work with. Like, at all. And it's insane. So Neptune in Pisces retrograde is going to be in retrograde towards the latter half of the year. So we're really going to see a lot of unveiling come to light. And just, we really need to have this review of like why this aversion is here. Like, we can't keep living avoidant and saying that is the way to live. Like, at some point we have to create some type of substantial structure that actually helps us move forward. On the 5th, we have the new moon in Cancer. New moon, setting intentions, goals, focus. And then in Cancer, the moon is ruled by Cancer. So this is super healing energy. And we want to look at what is positive. Like, we want to, looking at the positive takes a bit of rewiring for your brain, because our brains don't immediately think that way, because our brains are wired for survival and security. And so what we end up doing is scrutinizing everything and looking for the negative. So this new moon in Cancer is like, what is actually positive? Let's grab onto that. And let's grab onto it in a healthy way, not in a way that becomes obsessive, like, it's like you start working out, and working out is great, but then you get a bit obsessive over it. Like, everything needs a state of balance. Excuse me. On the 21st, we have the second full moon in Cancer, because we have Cancer, full moon in Capricorn, because we already had a full moon in Capricorn for June. And so we have a second one in July. Um, so this is just basically telling you that your plan of action needs to make sense, right? So in June, we were looking at kind of organizing our steps. And, this isn't really about risk. It's more about, like, if you're going to do the thing, make sure that, like, you're being rational. Make sure that things actually make sense, that you have the resources, that you have the tools. Like, certain times you're supposed to be out there and you just kind of wing it. And then more often than not, it's like, just put this stuff in order. Like, you really don't have to put yourself in a position where you're struggling, like, on purpose. So, full moon in Capricorn, just really take the time to make sure that your plan of action for anything that you're doing for yourself, make sure that it's rational and it makes some sense, and it's actually going to be progressive. Like, you don't need to be out here just doing anything. This, like, what is your purpose? What is your why? And that kind of goes back to, looking at that new moon in Cancer and that Neptune retrograde in Pisces. Like, why? That kind of keeps coming up. Why are we here? Why are you doing that? Why are you choosing this? And have a valid answer, right? So Sun moves into Leo on the 22nd. We enter into Leo season at 3:44 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is just an influx of movement and healing energy. Leo is ruled by the sun. So think of just pathways being illuminated, lights being on. Fire energy is movement, passion, drive. This is really a time of healing by fire. Like, burn some things down, let them go. Let's not, like, reopen that bridge. You can let that pathway be done so you don't try to go back through that path again, right? But sometimes we don't want to go back through the path again. It's like, it already didn't work. That's cool. We'll do something else. And maybe don't give yourself the option to be able to go back through that path. Maybe, we burn that path up because we don't need to go back to what was comfortable. And then we have, wrapping up the month, Chiron in Aries retrograde. So Chiron is the wounded healer. So the story with Chiron, it has some Sagittarius element in it. The philosopher, the healer, the archer. Chiron was just a philosopher to the gods, a healer to the gods, but Chiron was a demigod and could not heal himself. Like, he could do all these things for other people, but just was not able to heal himself. And so a lot of times people come to me for their natal chart and they're just kind of like, oh, I'm so good at doing this for other people, but I suck at examining this for myself. And I said, well, that's just kind of the way that you have allowed things to be, because you don't exercise that muscle properly, right? If you exercise that muscle properly, you will be good at doing those things for yourself. You have to take that same energy that's in your storehouse that you use for other people. Why have you not used that for yourself? Like, and so you have to think, here goes the why again. Why have you not used that for yourself? Why are you being a martyr and using that energy for someone else when you should be using it for yourself? You got to kind of think about these things. So Chiron retrograde in Aries on the 26th. This is understanding being assertive versus aggressive, right? Um, and so one of the things about being assertive is that it is confident, it understands what you need. Like assertive energy says, I understand what I need. I know what I deserve, and I'm not going to settle. So I'm going to be clear in my communication about the things that I need so I can, you know, make sure that I'm requiring from others the things that I need, cuz people don't read minds in that way. Aggressive is not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't take in account necessarily the proper way to communicate with other people. It just says I'm going to go at this, and then it's completely more reactive, and so you're going about the thing and then you're tidying up on the back end, versus the assertive is like, I'm going to proactively say this before I step in, because if I proactively am clear about my needs and my desires, if you just straight up say I can't do that, then I can step out without any extra energy. So Chiron in Aries retrograde, assertive versus aggression. This is looking at where we may be creating exaggerated movement versus making progress with healthy steps. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes those aggressive movements are needed, and sometimes you got to kind of bump some things out the way, because they've been in the way too long, they haven't moved, you tried to move them, yada yada yada, and so now we're just gonna have to be aggressive and just move things out the way. There's a time and a place for that. But what has happened, I think, with what I call read culture, and things like that, people are just used to just being aggressive from the start. There's no conduct, there's no decorum, um, there's no like thinking of those things first so we can set a foundation. Aggression is needed. Sometimes you need to shake the foundation and just tumble it all down. But more often than not, if we're building relationships and we're aware of ourselves and how we show up in this world, we could be more proactive, um, and making sure that we, make progress with these healthy steps. So, I mean, July has a lot of interesting energy. Mercury moves into Leo that month. Mars moves into Gemini. Mercury also has a Virgo transit as well. Venus is also in Leo. So there's this fire. There's this passion. There's this passion about how we move. There's this passion about coming together in relationships, but we want to make sure that we do that with a decent foundation. Um, there's a space for advocacy and speaking up more. That Mars in Gemini, this is, strategy and warrior elements. This is also a good time for the arts and creating as well. People don't also always think about the sun as creative energy, but it totally is. So just with all of that in mind, I want to know what you are thinking where July is concerned, and what things you're really looking forward to. Like, what's on your plate? What has been happening for you in the first half of the year, and how will you just kind of use these July alignments to maybe make a pivot for yourself? Maybe there's a shift you need to make. Maybe there's some things that have come undone, and so now you need to just kind of like sweep the ashes away and look at how you need to rebuild. Like this is what July is about. July kind of gives you that healing shift and that healing pivot, so you can go ahead and make sure that the path is clear as we get into the second half of the year.